whatsoever on air quality. So
is it reassuring that planning applications will be required to provide that evidence?
No, sir, because at that point, of course, the principle will have been established in the local plan. And all the developer would be required to do at the present moment is reasonable mitigation. And it may be a real difficulties to mitigate these impacts. Or, for example, if we take, say, EMV 15, if that were to have major impacts on air quality in Fulford, which it undoubtedly will do, sir, if that could not go forward because of those air quality impacts, it would mean that this plan, basically the central plank of this plan, would fall. So it is very important, sir, that you satisfy yourself that the major development proposals of this plan will not significantly worsen air quality in the city.
If I'm understanding what you've just said correctly, what you're saying, and I just want to be clear, is that you think there are matters in ENV, in draft policy ENV1, which means there's something ticking inside the allocation, that something might come out during the planning application process which effectively stymies the allocation that's been put together. I'm understanding that correctly, I think, Hunter.
Yeah, basically, yes. Well, the plan, whenever I'm using EMV 15 as an example, it could be a number of sites. That will undoubtedly identify major air quality impacts upon the Fulford air quality management area and probably the other air quality management area within York. The council at that point would be faced with a decision either that those air quality problems were so severe that planning permission should be refused, which would actually mean that the whole of the development strategy of the plan would be overthrown, or it could just try and mitigate those, but it may not mitigate those to acceptable levels.
What you're saying is that exercise or that analysis should take place before you allocate rather than before you grant planning permission?
Absolutely. So it needs to be at a level proportionate to the fact this is a plan-making exercise and not a planning application. I fully accept that. And it would be a high-level exercise. I fully accept that. But to have no exercise whatsoever would, in my opinion, be incorrect, because this is as a single factor could frustrate the whole development strategy of the plan. If indeed we found that there was is as likely there would be significant problems with air quality. So if for example, the local plan was showing little increase in traffic within the air quality management areas, I wouldn't be asking for it, but it shows the reverse, sir. So I think it is a point that needs to be considered at this stage, at least at a high level.
Mr. Elvin?
Well, firstly, I note Mr. Corsair is not putting forward evidence to suggest that the air quality will be unacceptable. All he's doing is making submissions. Secondly, at a high level, air quality is sustainability objective 12. And if you look at the strategic sites proposal at 6.2, it's one of the factors which is put into the balance with regard to each of the sites. You will see that with few exceptions, in fact, I think only there are a few exceptions in 6.2, air quality issues may arise in respect of nearly all the sites. That, however, does not get them through the gate if at the time of the planning application they fail ENV1. And Mr. Corsair doesn't seem to me to have understood ENV1, which begins, development will only be permitted if. And in my respectful submission, what the plan does is entirely acceptable in terms of a high-level assessment Air quality is, of course, a concern, and I've highlighted a number of references so far. It is one of the factors which has been considered in allocating sites, but the final decision will be made when the form and quantum and circumstances of each individual development comes forward in accordance with ENV1. And in my submission, that is entirely consistent with the approach that you take at the local plan stage. And Mr. Corsier's approach, if applied across the board to all other technical matters, would mean the local plan process would be endless and endlessly detailed, even more so than it is at the moment, which is something we're struggling to get away from, as I understand it. But there has been sufficient assessment, and there is then sufficient protection through the development management policies.
Can I just check, are any of the sites within any of the AQMAs?
Sorry, I need to check the diagrams. There are a couple of the sites which you will see, if you go to 6.2, have got a red flag on them in terms of it being a significant issue. ST32, ST36, I think, in particular, and part of ST20. But I'll look into that further for you.
Can I come back, sir, very briefly?
Go on then. Very briefly.
Can I take you to page 17 of 24A, of how sites have been evaluated?
What document is 24?
It is 24A. It is the essay accompanying the proposed modifications. I think it's the most latest essay.
Okay.
It's page 17, sir. And it sets out...
Trying to find it, Mr. Corsi, please.
I have the same problem. If I'm wrong, it's what I've put on the front of my document. It's the essay accompanying the proposed modifications. Yes, sorry. Sorry. And so if you look under Objective 12, improve air quality, you will see that the only criteria being used, sir, is simple physical distance from an AQMA. There is no consideration whatsoever of the impacts of off-site traffic upon AQMAs, which of course is, and we know from the, repeat the point, the essay, so the submitted local plan makes clear that it is traffic which is the main problem of air quality in the city. And so that just isn't judged by the ESA.
Are you on, sorry, Mr. Corsi, are you on page 17?
Page 17, 17, sir.
Right at the bottom.
Right at the bottom, onto page 18.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a consideration within the essay of the air quality impacts on traffic on the strategic sites.
Can I
please
introduce Mr. Williamson, who is responsible, in part at least, for the essay?
Thank you, sir. I'd highlight Appendix I of the essay report. You have to forgive me, my reference isn't coming to hand straight away, but CD, the main essay, the 2018 essay report, Appendix I. So that's where the more detailed assessment of the strategic site alternatives is set out. And under there, you will see that broader considerations beyond the site in terms of traffic impacts under SA Objective 6, and then in terms of air quality under SA Objective 12 are set out. And in terms of ST15, if you bear with me, I'll be able to give you the PDF reference for the page. I'm scrolling through. In terms of air quality, that is set out PDF page 150. So in terms of the particularly air quality, so that is Objective 12, and you can see broad considerations under that assessment, and it does reference air quality, potential impacts in terms of reference to the air quality management area, Fulford Road, the A64, and then under mitigations, well, it looks like it's actually, the box says assumptions, but that is the mitigation section. It talks about needing full air quality impact assessment, and then sustainable travel measures. And then within the policy, which is SS13, there are a range of measures which promote sustainable travel within and to and from the site.
If I can just add into that, if you look at the assessment of likely significant effects under that, you'll see that it considers a number of range of options in terms of the boundary, in terms of air quality as well, depending on where you draw the boundaries, and deals with emissions connected with HGVs and construction traffic, as well as other issues. And you'll find the Appendix I is a very detailed site-by-site appraisal against each of the objectives. ST50, the relevant page, as you say, PDF 150, it's internal page I131 to I132, if you're working from the paper version. Yeah, and I think we've got another. Yes, Julian.
Yes, Julian Ridge. So one thing that I wanted to introduce more generally is the City Council's approach to managing air quality in York, where we have a very proactive approach by UK standards. We've been collecting large amounts of air quality data since 1999. We have monitoring stations across the city. We are electrifying our bus network very quickly. And I think maybe a final point is to make the point that air quality is a moving target at the moment as the vehicle fleet electrifies. My understanding is that the air quality management area in Fulford was actually revoked in 2020 in response to improving air quality in that area, and as a result of some of these measures that we're taking forward.
Well, has it been?
So that is news to me.
Yes, my research last night indicated that it had been, but I can absolutely confirm that later.
I think that would be useful, yes. If that is the case, well, please. And maybe Mr. Cursier, you can check that as well if you have the potential to do that before we break for lunch. Should we take a few more things before lunch, or what do you think? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's Paul Butler, TW Field, site ST7, ST14. The points I want to make cover this section, so 4.6 to 4.10, but stray a little bit onto 4.11 and 12, so I thought we'd do them in one go, save us all some time. It's to go back to a point made by Mr. Johnson and Mr. Good in respect of the plan referencing where further additional growth or sites may go should the council need to deliver them. Well, obviously that decision will be made through the local plan process, of course, won't it? So the point for me is we've got the time between now and when the plan's adopted to resolve those issues. And the key starting point would be that the policy SS1 and the evidence base that supports it, for me, again, provides appropriate evidence base to allow those judgments to take place. Specifically, ST7 and ST14, again, the figure 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 and CYC Doc 59G Annex 5 effectively for us provide evidence that should those sites need to expand, they would do so within areas that fail to lie within the areas of constraint identified, which the council have obviously used for site selection criteria. So effectively, those areas we would be seeking to expand into would be white land on those plans. So for us, therefore, the existing red lines are overly and unnecessarily restrictive. And that's confirmed for us by the previous sustainability appraisal work in terms of previous iterations of the site was assessed, and back in the day when they were larger, they were seen as being sustainable at that size. And I think the point is if needed or required, and I think that's where we'll take the point further in respect of the phase 3 discussions, because we definitely think they are needed and required. But in terms of the discussion today, the evidence base does allow those judgments to be made from this point forward, and therefore even though we don't support our current red line boundary, the evidence base which allows us then to discuss that further in phase 3 is there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they want to submit on these questions, this group of questions? In which case I'll come back to you, Mr. Elvin, if there's anything that's just been... Sorry, am I missing you? Forgive me, Mr. Merritt, isn't it? I think it's look, if I'm going to make an excuse, okay? Your nameplate is against the glass, and I haven't got my glass. It's my fault.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
On the air quality issue, whilst I'm pretty sure Julian is correct that the Fulford AQMA has been revoked, that's my recollection, and it still leaves the city centre AQMA, which is a large one, and is where a large amount of the congestion that is predicted in the council's transport modelling is going to occur. I think the other factor that needs to be taken into account is that whilst levels of pollution have been reducing and places like Fulford have been able to be excluded from AQMAs, the EU, shortly before we left the EU, implemented a new air quality directive which is binding on the UK and which the UK government has yet to implement, which significantly reduces the permissible levels. And therefore areas which may have dropped out of AQMAs are likely to fall back in. So even in terms of Fulford, there may well be issues arising out of the development implications. I think the other point I'd make is in terms of the transport issues. If you look at the government's 2015 guidance, it is very clear about what is required in terms of those transport assessments, including what are the mitigations. I mean, I quote you paragraph 3, consider the cumulative impacts of existing and proposed development on transport networks, assess the quality and capacity of transport infrastructure and its ability to meet forecast demands, and identify the short, medium and long-term transport proposals across all modes. And that has clearly not been done by the council and ought to be done, because otherwise the plan will not be sound and you will not necessarily have the right things in the infrastructure delivery programme.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Is there anything else on this group of questions? Go on.
Thank you, sir, and apologies for coming back to this. I'm just a little concerned that the response from the council to all of this discussion is don't look for much quantification, we are able to make professional judgments on the relative merits of alternative options and on the different factors in the sustainability appraisal. It's very clear to us that it is possible to analyse these impacts. I'm thinking specifically here of the impacts on transport, but I'm sure it will apply elsewhere. And it is feasible to do so within the timescale that you, sirs, have for your phases 3 and phase 4. So I would urge you not to rely too much on qualitative statements of possible impacts, which are open to significant debate and will simply leave the wider public uneasy about the impacts of this plan. Let's get some appropriate quantification underway, and underway as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. May. I'm going to come back to the council, and I think we can break for lunch then. Mr. Elwyn?
I've already said, in response to Mr. May several times, we are updating the transport assessment. Thank you.
If that, in which case then we'll break for lunch now, I think. Can we resume at 1:45? Everyone content with that? 50 minutes? Until then, everyone, thanks for your help this morning. I'll see you shortly. 1:45.